Often overlooked and very underrated, this is one of the best sports cars I can recommend to almost anyone. The third generation Mazda MX-5, or NC Miata. It's often referred to as the redheaded stepchild of the Miata family, even more so than the Fiata, or Fiat 124 Spider, the one that was shared with the ND platform. And even though the NC gets all the hate, once you start understanding what kind of car this is, you'll start questioning the hate too. So a common argument is that Mazda took a departure from the simplicity that was the first Miatas. And that's not entirely true. I mean, even in 2015, this car didn't have Bluetooth music capability. Tell me that's not simplicity. Now, the NC ran for a long production period, the longest of any Miata so far, from 2005 to 2015. And within that 10-year span, they had 2 refreshes. So you have NC1, NC2, and NC3. So let me give you kind of a long-term review on what the NC is. I've had multiple NCs totaling over 60,000 miles, and I've had them for a total of 4 years. So I feel like that gives me the qualifications to kind of say what this car is, what it's capable of, and what it lacks. So first of all, what is this? This is a 2012 Special Edition, the last year of the NC2. Now, Mazda tried something new with this particular model. They tried a black color contrast with the other color. So it has a black color contrasted roof, roll hoops, mirrors, and even a new gunmetal black wheel. It also had everything as standard: the suspension package, which includes the limited slip differential, Bilstein shocks, etc., and all the creature comforts of the premium package with the Grand Touring. So they only made 450 of these, half in this crystal white pearl color and then half in a Velocity red. They sold like hotcakes. So because this was so successful, they created a new trim the next year with the NC3, the Club trim. It had all the contrasting color bits just like this one, as well as the suspension package as standard. Otherwise, it was a bit more bare bones. They felt like it was more of the race track ready Miata. So I heavily considered a Club based on its appearance, but because it's my only car, my daily driver, I decided I wanted everything. And the only way to get that is this special edition. It took me months to track one down, but I finally found one across the country, bought a one-way ticket, and drove it back. No regrets. So the first thing you typically notice is the styling of a car. I guess you could say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I personally love it, with an asterisk. I love the NC2 and NC3 facelifts. The NC1, on the other hand, on stock form, is a bit tall. There's a bit too much wheel gap above the arches. And I know this can be corrected with aftermarket suspension items, but I still love it. I love all the NCs. I think the styling is making a comeback. It's curvy and muscular, not as sharp and angled as the new ND. It's a bit thick with a few C's, and I like it. But it fits the Mazda ethos of that era. You can see the similarities, especially to the RX-8, which was somewhat co-developed with the NC platform. They share the platform somewhat. Not exactly, but the NC is somewhat of a shrunken RX-8, using a lot of the same parts, trimmed down to accomplish some weight shaving. With that in mind, you can see why so many people use RX-8 parts as upgrades to the NC. Things such as brakes, sway bars, even the windshield wiper stock. Yes, you heard that right. But you can see the similarities with the kind of the haunches and even getting under the car. Like the suspension setup is largely the same. It's very much a RX-8 family piece. So for all you chasing numbers out there, here's some of the specs. It's a 2-liter MZR engine, inline 4, with 167 horsepower and 140 pound-feet of torque. Those are not big numbers, but this is also a small car. It's only 2,500 pounds or so. So 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds. Some people have gotten 6.5 seconds. I'm not sure why there's such a difference, but I'm not going to test it for you because I'm at 5,500 feet. It lacks a bit of oomph up here with the naturally aspirated 4-cylinder. Overseas, a few markets got the 1.8 liter MZR with 126 horsepower and 123 pound-feet of torque. That's pretty bad. 0 to 60 in 10 seconds, I think. Yikes. The base model, which is a Sport, has a 5-speed manual And there's an all-new 6-speed manual and an all-new 6-speed automatic with paddle shifters. Mind you, not the proper paddles with one down, one up. They have kind of a, the rear paddle on both sides goes up, and then there's a little trigger above the arms of the steering wheel that puts it down. I don't understand why they did that. I didn't really like using them on my automatic NC, but this one, I don't have that problem. And the manual, starting with NC2, got a redline bump due to new forged internals. Now 7250 redline versus the original, I think it was 6900 or something like that. The automatic, as usual, gets some hate. Most people scoff at an automatic Miata. But if you need or prefer one, it is a really good automatic. Far better than the NA or NB 4-speed slush boxes that they offered. It's extremely responsive, almost always picked the gear it needed and I wanted. Plus the manual shifting was great, especially for not being a DCT or anything fancy. And now, handling. This has, like I said, the suspension package, so it has Bilsteins and a limited slip differential, which is pretty great out here in the snow. But yeah, the Miata, 50-50 weight distribution. They're really proud of that. Every single generation has had that. So need I say more? I mean, it handles brilliantly. Most Miatas struggle with body roll. They ride quite well, but there's a reason most people recommend suspension or sway bars as a first modification. The NC1, as I mentioned before, was far worse in stock form, often called a 4x4. This was improved with the NC2 and NC3, especially with the suspension package. But it truly is well sorted from the factory. I have no complaints. And let's talk about comfort. Well, it's a tiny 2-seat roadster. What'd you expect? That being said, it is the biggest Miata. It has the biggest interior space and the best passenger legroom. I think passengers in general are most comfortable in this one. So the seats aren't bad. These are the leather seats that come with the Special Edition or Grand Touring trims. Some touring trims. There's also cloth seats, which actually hold you a bit better in place, but they aren't heated. So there's pros and cons to both. This is not ND seats. The ND does have better seats. I will say that absolutely, especially the ND2 Grand Touring. Those are like clouds. I would sit in that all day at work if I had to. But the NC, I think overall is the best interior. It creaks, it has some rattles, but that's kind of expected. And while we're in here, let's talk materials. Again, it's a cheap, lightweight roadster, so let's just say the materials wasn't the focus here. They're not terrible, but it leaves something to be desired. So having had both an NC1 and NC2, I can say the two definitely had some interior improvements. The center console's better. This is now leather, although that's pretty thin. Cup holders are fine. Just plastic everywhere. This is actually an ND shift knob, fun fact. Got the seat heaters here, AC and temperature controls. This is an aftermarket head unit. Before it had a bunch of switches that you never use. The strange advanced keyless ignition. You still twist it just like a normal car, but you don't need to put a key in it. Kind of interesting, precursor to the push button start days, I guess. So it's different. That came with the premium package. And then you gotta love the beautiful piano black plastic, the fingerprint and dust catcher of all things. And the NC2, this cup holder is in each door. The NC1, it actually kind of stuck out a bit, and it was kind of annoying for your legs. So that's also an improvement. And then, of course, more leather here. And by that, I mean about this thick. The auto-dimming mirror. I added this dash cam, put an LED light up there. And now the infamous RX-8 stock. For some reason, the NC did not have this. It had on, intermittent, which they just chose a random speed, and then 1 and 2. So for some reason, yeah, people like adding this as an accessory. And then aftermarket gauge faces. I thought they were a little more exciting than the standard. 3.5mm jack. That was not on the NC one, although you could get an adapter that plugged into the back of your head unit, depending on the trim, whether you had the Bose. So this has the 7-speaker Bose, one in the middle, 2 in each door, a woofer mid-range and a tweeter, and then the 2 in the middle here. And then we have proper storage right there where I keep my big fluffy hat, and a proper glove box full of random things. So yeah, basically the materials were a low priority, but they are actually decent for what it is. It's no Mercedes or BMW Roadster, but at the same time, you didn't pay that much when this came out. Of course, reviewing a car nowadays, you have to talk about technology. Granted, this is older technology. It didn't really change much between 2005 and 2015, which in 2005 it was okay. In 2015, definitely left a lot to be desired. But from the beginning, it could be had with a 7-speaker, 6-disc Bose speaker system, auto-dimming mirror, heated seats, keyless ignition, although not a push-button start. And as the years progress, sports cars, cars in general really got more and more tech. Well, this didn't. It still had almost the same things it had in 2005, 2006 as it did in 2015. But like many cars in the mid-2000s, it's very easy to do modifications and replacements and upgrades yourself. For example, this aftermarket head unit, and now I have Apple CarPlay. Now, as far as trunk space goes, it's decent, 5.3 cubic feet, 150 liters. Enough to carry all my camera gear, and then some. I've actually taken this on many road trips around the country with my wife as well, and she packs a bit more than me. But it suits the purposes quite a bit. And speaking of road trips, it actually travels quite well as far as gas mileage, at least for a fun sports car. You can get 30 on the highway, of course low 20s around the city. Just depends how you drive, I guess. It does take premium fuel, so that's a consideration. But if you consider miles per gallon, you're doing fine. Let's talk about long-term reliability. Again, I had my NC1 at 250,000 miles, still never had any major issues. The one thing people often mention is the coolant overflow expansion tank, whatever you call it. It does have a tendency to crack somewhere near the neck region, and then if you don't shut the engine off soon enough, it can brick your whole engine. So that's an issue, yes, but it's also solvable. You can either get a new OEM expansion tank or an aftermarket one. I'm planning to get an aluminum one myself here pretty soon, but you never know. My NC1 with all those miles had the original tank. It's kind of a weird, not guaranteed problem, but there is a guaranteed solution, so keep that in mind. But even the NC1 was an automatic transmission that had never been serviced. Apparently you're supposed to service it every 100,000 miles. This one never was, so I guess it missed 2 services. Still shifted like it did when it was new. So these are pretty bulletproof as far as fun sports cars go. Very low maintenance generally, and when it does need something, it's easy to do. So that's why I love this car. I've learned to work on cars through the NC Miata, and it's been a blast. One reason I didn't go with the ND was because it was having transmission quality issues, even into their 4th and 5th version of it. I think they may be pretty solid at this point. Fun fact, the Fiat 124 Spider, you know, the one that shares the platform with the ND, actually uses an NC transmission to handle the power from the turbo. Who knew? Now you do. But yeah, long story short, you take care of it, it takes care of you. Regular maintenance, you should be fine. So now that the sun is coming out, something else special about the NC is the roof options. This had a power retractable hardtop that came starting with the 2007 model, and it's one of the reasons I also wanted this car. It takes 12 seconds to fully open or close. So let's go drive one of the best driver's cars there is. The transmission is one of the first things you'll notice. It's absolutely brilliant. Very buttery smooth. One of the only things I did to improve it was to use the coveted unicorn tears, as they call it. Basically the Ford Motorcraft transmission oil. Somehow it just improves it that much more. And again, mine is entirely stock performance-wise. The exhaust sounds a bit better. But the suspension is entirely from the factory. It is the Bilstein suspension package with limited slip differential. And that does help me in the snow a bit. But I just love driving this car. It's the type of car where you make excuses to go drive. You're like, oh man, I forgot the milk at the grocery store. It's an incredibly raw sports car, and that's something I love about it. There is no rev matching, there's no hill start assist. It's, can you drive a manual? Okay, go drive. It is very easy to learn how to rev match your downshifts. In fact, it's really an easy transmission to learn a manual car on. I actually learned manual, I guess, on motorcycles. So when I flew out to Ohio, one-way plane ticket to buy this and drive it all the way back to Denver, I was kind of learning to drive a manual car the entire trip. Only stalled it twice, but it's very easy to drive. It's obviously fun on country roads and the back roads, but it's definitely some of the most fun you can have within the speed limit. They always describe it as slow car fast, and that's really how this feels. There's been many times where I see a cop slamming on my brakes and then realize, wait, I was never even doing the speed limit to begin with. So with that in mind, it's actually a really fun car to drive in the town. Even rush hour traffic isn't terrible. Okay, it's still terrible, but it's doable. I've done it a lot. Now, a car people will often compare to this is the Mazda Miata RF, retractable fastback. And that is, yes, another retractable folding roof from Mazda on a Miata, but it's different. With the roof down, the RF is somewhat of a targa top, more or less. It's not bad, but the wind buffeting kind of annoyed me a little bit, and you don't have that with the NC. That's another reason I wanted the power retractable hardtop. It's a true convertible with the top end. And if you put the windows up, it's really pretty calm in here. So as I mentioned, I live up in Colorado, in Boulder, and I daily drive this. If you put two and two together, you may be wondering, what do you do in the winter? I daily drive this. I have a separate set of wheels with snow tires. It's super easy to switch them out, and it really provides an excellent winter vehicle. Now, your biggest limiting factor with proper snow tires is really ground clearance, but they do pretty well with the snow out here. The plows kind of know what they're doing. Now we're going for a quick drive with the top up. As you can probably tell, it's still noisy. I'm only doing 25. I am on dirt roads, so keep that in mind. But even with the retractable hardtop, it's still pretty loud in here. There's a lot of things you can do, like sound dampening on the doors and behind the seats and the trunk bed, and that's all on my to-do list. But at the same time, I didn't really buy this to be a quiet, luxurious car. It's no Tesla. One huge benefit of the power retractable hardtop is, not having a soft top. You don't have to replace it every few years. You don't have to maintain it quite as well, and you don't have to worry about someone slashing your top and taking your radio. I don't even know if people do that anymore, but you don't have to worry about it. color, you know, with a special edition in the club. But there are a lot of great looking NCs out there with the color matched retractable hardtops to the rest of the car. That's a great look too. Just depends what you're going for. I am going to need a car wash after this. And, you know, the comfort for road trips is definitely decent for what it is. Again, I would much rather take this on a road trip than an NA or an NB Miata or, you know, an old BMW Z3 or anything like that. This is probably the most road trippable Miata, especially as far as storage capacity. The ND, especially the ND2 with those amazingly comfortable seats, I'd rather drive that, but this is still a great road trip car. The seats are fine. I'd say after about 10 hours with like almost no stops, that's probably my limit. But if you do, you know, I've done 14 hours in a day and I just took longer stops, I felt completely fine. And that's coming from someone with some back problems, so you should be okay. The heated seats are great, especially in the cold. And it's such a small cabin that the heat and the AC are very effective very quickly. I had my NC1 in Texas, where summers would easily hit 110 degrees or more, and it was a dark green, almost black color. So it definitely attracted some warmth, but within a few minutes the AC was kicking in full blast and I was in a cool interior, so it's possible. And once I added CarPlay, it actually did have everything I wanted for a car that does road trips. CarPlay is something I used way more than I expected. I really like it. I don't know why it took me so long to put it in here, but it has cruise control, CarPlay, heated seats, climate control, automatic climate control. It's kind of terrible at the automatic setting, but it's there. And starting with NC2, they added that 3.5mm headphone jack, if your phone somehow still has a headphone jack, and they added a temperature readout on the gauges. It's those little things that I appreciate. So how do I summarize? It's the heritage and the homage of simpler times. It just simply drives when you need it. It lacks the uncertainty of old components or questionable electronics. Now, there's nothing wrong with the adventure that is an old roadster, say a Lotus Elan or Jaguar E-Type, or even the original Miata. Those have their place. They have quirks and maintenance and, you know, it's the lifestyle of a project car, but it's extremely fun in its own way. It just depends what you're looking for. If you want a roadster that is ready to go anytime you need it and is very easy to take care of and takes care of you, look no further. This was built on those very legends, and I think it'll be your cup of tea. So I hope you enjoyed this and learned something new. If you're in the market for an easy roadster that is a lot of fun and somewhat modern, but still has those original rough rattles and creaks of older roadsters, look no further. This is a great car, and I encourage you to find one. Don't be afraid to extend that 100-mile radius of your search. If you find one across the country, it should most likely get you back home. Take care.